Hello and welcome everybody back to Mana on the Rocks. It is I, Earbald Boy Joe. Joining me as always is my wonderful co-host Atlas.
Hey everybody. Joe, I have a question for you this week.
What's up?
So I was looking at the ban list on for Commander.
Mm-hmm.
I wish Paradox Engine was unbanned.
That 5-mana do-nothing artifact, it can come back any day. It's not going to wreck anything. Or it should say banned. I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. But you know what's already legal? I found a substitute.
Oh, do tell.
Paradox Engine.
Gatherer isn't coming up with anything.
It's called Displacer Kitten is his actual name. You want to have a conversation about that this week?
Sure, I'm down. We should grab a drink.
Yeah, so we have to talk about my favorite card today.
It's a good card to talk about.
There's a lot of stuff to cover about it. Displacer Kitten. I just watched the D&D movie last night.
How was it?
Last night. It was good. It was way better than I was expecting it to be. It's one of the best films I've seen in theaters in a long time. So highly recommend for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. But I was also super pumped because I got to see Displacer Kitten all grown up. About halfway through, there was a Displacer Beast that made an appearance.
Oh, so that's kind of cool.
I was hyped. Have you seen it yet?
I haven't. That's on my short list of movies I need to watch before it leaves theaters. Or I'll probably just wait until it's on streaming and watch it later.
Yeah, I recommend it. I did not regret the $10 or whatever it was at all. And the chance to see my little boy all grown up on the big screen. He's a star now.
That's good. I've heard overall like pretty positive things about it. I've heard it's mainly just a nice, fun movie.
Yeah, it was creative. It was enjoyable. It was just nice to not have something that was number 9 sequel derivative generic Marvel X, Fast and Furious X, whatever it is.
My favorite review I've heard about the D&D movie is it's by far the best Marvel movie to ever exist. I think that's really funny.
I don't disagree with that, to be honest with you. But it was really nice to not have it be like straight up superheroes. But that's not why we're here today.
That's not why we're here.
We are here to talk about my boy, the Displacer himself. So for those who are not familiar with the card, just what is printed on it, it is a card called Displacer Kitten. It is 1 blue pip and 3 generic mana to get a creature that is a cat beast. It has the ability Avoidance. Says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. And it is a 2/2 creature. So there's a lot going on in this card. And today's episode, we're just gonna kind of break it down and explore some of the different ways that the card can be used, because it's definitely one of the most flexible, interesting cards, I think, that's been printed in a long time.
Yeah, I remember when this card was first spoiled, I think the general consensus was, this card's going to break stuff, we just don't know how to break it yet.
Yeah, I know that when it got spoiled, I was like, oh, that's super cute, and I immediately started thinking about like how to include it in the creature-based decks for the most part that played blue. I thought about like, oh, it's neat, you can like abuse enter the battlefield triggers, and then the longer it was out, the more stuff came out that people were teching with it, and like, oh, this is nuts, oh, that's nuts, oh, that's nuts. Because if you read carefully, the wording on the ability says exile a non-land permanent you control. So not only can it exile creatures, it can also flicker artifacts to allow you to reset them to tap for more mana. If they're mana rocks, you can reset things with activated abilities if they don't have summoning sickness. And planeswalkers are another cool thing. Enchantments if they have an ETB trigger, or you can just use it to dodge spot removal. And of course, the best part about this card is that it doesn't say another target non-land permanent, so it itself can be displaced.
So Kitten's got what I like to call really good text on it, because every single decision point that you can see in just terms of like game design, it's nearly the best thing that it could possibly choose. It doesn't say another, so it flickers itself. It's non-land permanent you control, which is everything besides lands, which, to be fair, I think that being the only restriction on it is balanced enough.
I wish I could flicker my Gaia's Cradle, though.
It flickers on non-creature spells, which, like, is fine. Flickering on creatures is kind of weird in blue anyway. It's also just kind of a weird thing to do in general. I feel like that loops way harder than Kitten does normally, but every single like thing that this card reads really, really good.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's one of those things where 4 mana seems like a lot for a card, but it's not double pipped. So
It's not double pipped.
It's not double pipped, so it's really not that challenging to cast. And even though it doesn't do anything on its own that's all that inherently busted, just the amount of synergies and actual infinite combos that can be achieved with this card are kind of nuts. Like only a small number of them are like, relevant in CEDH, but the sheer like just quantity itself is impressive.
Yeah, and we'll kind of dive into some of the nitty gritty with this card. But remember when I first saw this card in action, my brain just kind of went, I don't know how to stop this, except for like on the stack specifically. But even then, like the shells that you've come up with, and then I've kind of like derivatively worked on. All the best versions that we've come up with play green, and we play every single creature cheater we possibly can. That's like good. So like most of our shelves are blue green, so that gives us basically all the access we need to do things like Birthing Pod, Neoform, Eldritch Evolution, and other shenanigans. Just to, it's like
yeah.
Like the 4 casting costs. Sure, it exists. You're rarely ever casting this card for its casting cost. It's usually 1 to 2 mana, and you're cheating it in.
Frequently, sometimes it's 3.
Yeah,
I think the card's really nuts. I remember when, like, the week that it came out, we were at our locals, and I had an entire deck brewed up and ready to go. The only card that I was missing was Displacer Kitten, because it was releasing the next day. And so I was looking everywhere for somebody who had pre-released for Displacer Kitten, and everyone's like, "Why do you want this card? Like, it's cool, I guess, and there's some neat things you can do with it." And I was like, "No, I just really want to play it in this deck tonight." Finally found one, and whipped out this deck, ran it home, and I won every game that night with Displacer Kitten, and people were just like, "What the hell? What is this card?" Like, just caught everyone by surprise.
Was that deck at the time? That was still Kenrith, right? Like the deck was always Kenrith that you were building on, right?
Yeah, because it's just 5 color good stuff. Like if you get 5 colors, Displacer Kitten's fantastic in any deck that gets to play green and or white. But it's even better when you get to splash other colors in there.
Yeah. Having more colors to your disposal is just good, because at the very least you get more good instants and sorceries to good instants and sorceries to cast, because that triggers Displacer Kit. These are good things we want to do.
Yeah, it seems pretty obvious. Like, people talk about if you're adding colors to your commander, your deck gets stronger because you just have a larger card pool that have strong effects to have access to. But specifically with Displacer Kitten, I have found that because I have done a lot of testing with Displacer Kitten, but I found that if you add all 5 colors, the deck gets just infinitely stronger than it would if you only had access to maybe 2 or 3, because at that point, all of your good cards, like Dockside Extortionist and things like that have ETBs, even Thoracle if you're on a Thoracle shell, it allows you to reproc all of those, or if you're playing something that has a lot of rocks that you can flicker, Kitten's really strong with that too. So we'll talk about playing Kitten in lower color shells and some of the ways to abuse that in a little bit, but yeah, it's really strong because not only do you have all of these insane ETBs that span the entire color pie, but also you get access to a lot of non-creature spells to trigger it in the first place, that you would want to play anyways because they're just really strong. And in a lower color shell, you don't necessarily have a lot of instants and sorceries that you would, specifically instants is what we look for, but instants and sorceries to cast to proc this in a manner that you're not just casting them to trigger the Displacer Kitten and flicker something, where you're also accumulating value from your spell. And I think that's where Cat really shines, is the ability to attack on the two-pronged axis of the stack, as well as whatever permanent is already in play, re-triggering. And I think that is what makes the card especially strong, is if you build properly, you're effectively casting 2 spells every time you put something on the stack.
Mm-hmm. I think that point specifically is kind of why I like a lot of Displacer Kitten shells, because of that two-pronged attack. The Kenrith deck that you built and that I really got introduced to and helped out where I could really, it really showed me the idea of just card quality going up. Like, yes, these are things that like are good spells, but we also want them to feel good when we have Displacer Kitten out, when we need to just proc it. So you're on things like, like Slaughter Pact, for example, which is good removal, but also it triggers the kitten for free. Things like
Yep.
Noxious Revival, stuff like that. Like these free or cheap spells are really, really good at just triggering the kitten on a dime when we need to, or on top of other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which it just kind of makes the whole deck sing in a way that I personally don't really see in action in other CDH decks. I feel like a lot of CDH decks they're either they're too good stuffy in a sense, which is weird because this is also like a good stuff deck, but this is a good stuff kitten deck, which I would classify as different because I think the requirements are you need to be playing a completely different creature suite that's able to support the kitten.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, if you can play it in a lot of different shells too, because like if you look at Calamex is playing Displacer Kitten, which seems a little weird because it's a lower color shell, but you have access to green and blue, so it's good. Red means that you can flicker stuff with Dockside. Flicker your Dockside with the kitten to get more treasures and ramp and cast some more spells. But it's not, you don't necessarily have the same, aside from counter magic, the same degree of like, oh, well, I'm just going to cast this tutor. Now you have to counter my tutor, but also you have to like remove my Dockside Extortionist at the same time. Otherwise, I'm going to be making another like 3 or 4 mana that even if it's not infinite, will now allow me to cast another spell. Yeah,
it's a lot. It just starts snowballing out of nowhere, even with like one decent thing to flicker, even if it's like a mana vault or something.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. I think that's one of the craziest things that you can do, to be honest, is like you just and it's not because it's like inherently strong, but because your opponents just don't see the advantage accumulating the same way because it's not super impressive. Where it's just like you have a mana vault, you have a blue source, you tap the mana vault in your blue source, you cast Displacer Kitten, and then you cast like a Chrome Mox or something, and you flicker your mana vault. Now you just don't have to pay 4 mana next turn to untap your mana vault. It's like that's strong. People will be like, oh, that's pretty good. But when you then tap your mana vault in your Chrome Mox and you cast another non-creature spell, and now you flicker your mana vault, and that allows you to cast another non-creature spell, and then flicker something else because you have mana floating. Like it just keeps chaining spells together in a way that's like very Paradox Engine-esque. For those people who were around when that card was legal, Paradox Engine obviously super strong, and your thoughts on whether or not it deserves to still be banned. There's no denying that it did chain spells together incredibly well in a way that very few cards are able to. But that led to the nickname for Displacer Kitten when it came out, which was Paradox Engine.
It's a good name, in my opinion.
It's really clever. Whoever came up with that, very clever.
It's a solid name.
Yeah, but so super strong. And unlike Paradox Engine though, this card protects itself, so it's not as inherently busted. Where I'm going to cast a spell and untap all of my mana, and now cast another spell and untap all of my mana. But it can chain things together, and it protects itself, which is really strong. It's also a creature, so it's really easy to tutor out. It's hard to interact with in general, so it's got that going for it.
Cool. So walk me through some of the basic lines of Kitten, or even maybe like a small bit of history just about Kitten, because I know the deck has gone through a lot of review. Like we've put a lot of time and theory into this deck.
Yeah, there have been a lot of different like theory crafts around the card. There are combos with that card in every color combination ranging from mono blue up to 5 color. As long as you are in blue and can play Displacer, there's a combo in that color combination. And I think so I guess we'll start with probably the first line that was workshopped that I'm aware of had to do with Spellseeker. So Displacer Kitten and Spellseeker lends itself to a combo called Canned Tuna, where it basically allows you to get into Thoracle with just Displacer Kitten and Spellseeker. It generates the mana for it. It casts all the cards and gets everything into play with just those 2 cards and one black mana, assuming you're casting Spellseeker second. Now, when it first came out, a lot of people were talking about how the card was like going to be super inefficient, and this card would not see a lot of play because it. Yeah, it sounds silly now.
Inefficient for this card is a hilarious thing to denote, but continue.
Yeah, it's obviously not every deck's going to play it, because not every deck like wants this style of card. But there was a lot of talk about on Reddit and different forums and stuff saying how the card was just super useless because it's not the combo itself. If you want to do everything in one turn, it technically costs 8 mana at the most efficient. But the crazy thing about this combo and Displacer Kitten in general is that because it allows you to reproc ETBs, it allows you to throw out cards like Spellseeker or Dockside early to achieve their effect once and advance you into a mid-game point. I would say, in general, I would stylize it as more of a mid-range or control style card. Fast combo decks can play it, but it's not super conducive to that strategy because it is combo lines with Kitten do tend to be mana intensive. But it does allow you to play things out over 1 or 2 turns, and sort of like, not Voltron as in like, I'm going to hit you with commander damage, but like Voltron as in the Defenders, the anime, where everything just comes together and becomes this like super powerful machine that's really difficult to stop. So just for reference, the Displacer Kitten line, Cantuna, is most optimally, Displacer Kitten is in play and you cast Spellseeker. Now this can be done with the same amount of mana as casting Displacer Kitten, because you cast Spellseeker and you need 1 black mana afterwards. So if you cast Displacer Kitten on one turn and you cast Spellseeker on the next turn, Spellseeker enters the battlefield and you get a trigger. That allows you to tutor for a Dark Ritual, which you can then tap your last mana source for to cast Dark Ritual. That triggers Displacer Kitten, allowing you to flicker a Spellseeker and reproc it, allowing you to tutor for Entomb. You now generate 3 black mana upon the resolution of Dark Ritual. Then you can use 1 of that black to cast Entomb, which triggers the Kitten and procs Spellseeker, allowing you to fetch a Reanimate. Resolving the Entomb, you now have 2 black mana left, and you Entomb a Thassa's Oracle. You can now cast Entomb for 1 black, or sorry, not Entomb, Reanimate for that second black mana, leaving you with 1 black mana floating. It reprocs the Spellseeker because you're casting a non-creature spell. Grabs a Demonic Consultation, reanimates the Thoracle, and with the Thoracle trigger on the stack, you can cast the Demonic Consultation for your last black mana. So the outside of the mana requirements, the combo is completely self-contained to that the Displacer Kitten and the Spellseeker, which is really neat. And it's something that some more mid-rangey decks that play black-blue might want. But that's probably like the quote-unquote base for Displacer Kitten combos at this point. Mm-hmm. It was like the first one to come out. Then if we jump forward and... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that line in particular is really good, I think, at selling the exact style of deck that like Displacer Kitten shines in. Like in most blue-black decks, you're already playing Dark Ritual, you're already playing Thassa's Oracle, you're already playing Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact. You're probably... Reanimate is the one that I can see some contention on, but I'd argue that Reanimate's a good enough card that you can kind of toss it in whatever and it had to be just fine. Like, these are already cards that you were playing. If you care about creatures to some degree, you're going to be on Spellseeker, just because it's a good card. Finds counter magic and finds Psych Rift.
Yeah, maybe not every blue-black deck, but...
Yeah, pretty good. Like, it kind of slots in effortlessly and allows your deck to essentially find all of its pieces in one go, which I really like for brewing. I think that creates a lot more opportunity for creativity, for other options to kind of slide in, slide out, to adjust to where you need it to be.
Oh, for sure. I think one of the weird things about Kitten is that because it's a 4-cost that does nothing on its own inherently, doesn't make itself like super prominent in a lot of blue-black X shells necessarily, at least on the surface, because a lot of those decks are all like typically going to be on Nas. Like if you're into Mir, you should probably be playing Nas, unless you have a very specific brew going on. And because of that, why would you play a 4-mana card that does nothing? But I think the flip side of that argument is if you're playing a little bit, even if you're playing Nas, but you're playing a little bit more mid-rangey, like you're not trying to go for it super early, that on a medium Nas gives you a second way to go get your Thoracle combo really compactly, because instead of having to tutor up Thoracle and Consult, you could just like hit a Spellseeker and randomly get there, like, or you could hit the Thoracle while your Spellseeker's already in play, or something like that. And even if you hit it without that, all of your ramp in Blue-Black X is going to be rocks, really, unless you're Blue-Black-Green. So that means that you can just play the Displacer Kitten, and even if it doesn't make counterspells free, it definitely helps you cheat on mana values with them, which can be really useful. Allowing you to cast, maybe if you're only casting one counterspell because you're tapping your rocks, now maybe you can cast 2 counterspells in a turn cycle. So it's like a pseudo Seedborn Muse in some regards.
For sure.
Yeah. But then I'll jump us forward in the timeline here. So after the canned tuna combo came out, a little bit later after the card's release, people started really pushing. I'm not sure exactly where this one came from, but people started pushing this 3-fairy combo with Displacer Kitten. So 3-fairy is Teferi Time Raveler. Teferi Time Raveler, it's a slang term in CDH, and that card is a Planeswalker. It costs white, blue, 1. It enters the battlefield with 4 loyalty, and it has the static ability: each opponent can only cast spells at any time they could cast a sorcery. So it's a silence effect, more or less. It has an uptick of +1, allowing you to cast sorcery spells until your next turn as though they had flash, and it has a -3 downtick, returning up to 1 target artifact, creature, or enchantment to its owner's hand, and you draw a card. So the thought process behind this is pretty similar to the Spellseeker line. Is that it's a 3-mana card that's going to go infinite with Displacer Kitten by abusing the downtick, allowing you to draw cards. The only requirement for this is that it's a 3-card combo, because you have to have a positive or a neutral artifact that you can cast to trigger Displacer Kitten and flicker Teferi. The nice thing is that the combo protects itself, because your opponents can't cast spells except at sorcery speed. So if you're doing this on your turn, which is what you need to do in order to activate Teferi's loyalty abilities, your opponents are silenced, they can't interact with you. But the downtick, basically, you bounce like a Soul Ring or something after floating 2 mana to your hand. Use 1 of that mana to cast Soul Ring, proccing Displacer Kitten, flickering Teferi, resetting him from 1 loyalty to 4, resolving the Soul Ring, and now you get to do it again. So this is going to generate a surplus of mana if your rock goes positive, or even if it's neutral. Like you could do it with a Chrome Mox and just whiff the imprint every time, or a Lotus Petal even, but because you draw a card, eventually you'll find a way to start generating a surplus of mana, which at the absolute floor is going to draw your library and allow you to assemble a win condition from there, all still while under like a silence effect.
Yeah, this one I kind of am happy we don't see often, just because I think it's arguably one of the weaker lines that I've seen involving Kitten. Think of all the major lines, it's easily the least played. 3-fairy is just such a weirdo card. Like if you play it, you have to be winning, and if you're playing that card and have to be winning, I'd rather just resolve a Grand Abolisher. I guess there's upside with the Kitten specifically, but it's never a card that I'm like excited to sleeve up or put it in a list, you know?
Oh, for sure. It's I also have mixed feelings about the Teferi in general. This Teferi in general, just because it like you say, if you have to pass the turn, it's generally handing the game to somebody else.
Yeah, silence your opponents. Pretty good.
Yeah, because it's then on you to stop everyone else from winning the game on their turn, which is really hard, as it turns out. 1v3ing a table is not easy.
Very tough.
Yeah. That said, like, I've seen the combo do work. I've seen people play it. It's cool. And, of course, the philosophy of just don't play the Teferi if you're not ready to combo off with it holds. I don't know. It's a weird one. Because like we said, it can just end up handing the game if someone, especially if someone like is to your left has an Otawara or some ability or something that can stop you, or like can silence you in response, go to their turn, and now they are protected by Teferi, and they have a win in their hand. They can just go for it. So it's weird, kind of glass cannon-y, but at least right now, this is a really popular win condition because it does get through a lot of stacks pieces. Because you can always use Teferi's down tick to bounce someone else's stacks piece first, like a Rule of Law or something like that would shut off this particular combo.
And then just flicker
and then
it.
Cast another spell to proc the kitten, flicker Teferi, and then start your combo from there. So it's really flexible and really useful in that regard. For me, and as you mentioned, for you, doesn't really fit the playstyle I prefer to go for, because it is a card that you just cannot play without having the win for sure.
Yeah, we're not big fans of cards that read "win the game" or "don't win the game."
Yeah.
I like some sort of middle ground with most of my cardboard. I like the extremes are cool, but they're inconsistent is the issue.
Yeah. So okay, so those are the two that were like the primary combos with this card. Of course, right, like around the same time, there was discussion about Eternal Witness when the card released. Of course, people are saying you can go infinite with like Lotus Petal at a 1 cost to achieve an effect, or Lotus Petal and Jewel Lotus or something like that. LED. That combo hadn't seen a lot of play up until little after the Teferi combo caught on. People are like, oh, well now I can layer in like an Eternal Witness or Muldrotha as well. If you're like a Lotus Petal or an LED or something, Displacer Kitten goes infinite with that because you can flicker Muldrotha,
New instance, baby.
Instance. Yeah, new instance, and allowing you to recast the artifact that sacked itself from the graveyard. Flickering Muldrotha again, generate infinite mana. You have to have an outlet, so it is can be clunkier, but it is just, if you're playing Muldrotha, once again, just another card you should probably be playing because it goes infinite so easily. And at worst, insane value. And I think that is my favorite thing about Displacer Kitten, is that at the absolute floor, as long as you have something else in play, you're generating value. Sure, the very, very, like, the sub-basement level is you have nothing except 4 lands in a Displacer Kitten. Obviously, then it's not good. But if you have nothing except for 4 lands in a Displacer Kitten, you have bigger problems.
And you're casting a Displacer Kitten, like something went wrong somewhere else. Like it's not involved.
There are bigger problems.
Yeah.
So I tend to not evaluate cards from the structural integrity level, where it's like if this card is bad, you cannot win the game. So to that, in my mind, it's saying, oh, if this card is in play, you probably have at worst like a Soul Ring or something you can do with it. But generally speaking, this is like the last piece of the combo to come down. So that means that if that's the case, then evaluating it higher to the ceiling, the card is going to be super, super strong, if not game winning.
Mm-hmm. One of the cool things I think Eternal Witness in your deck, specifically Lurrus, also functions as an Eternal Witness in a pinch, specifically with like Petal or like LED if you're on that, is it's a way for you to kind of bridge everything together.
Yes.
It's also, if you jam out an Eternal Witness early, no one's gonna like shoot an Eternal Witness unless they know what's up. But even then, if they know what's up, then it's pretty easy to play around it for the most part.
Yeah, you can just wait until like Displacer Kitten goes under the stack or something, and then kill an Eternal Witness if you're scared.
Yeah, and hope they don't have the reanimation spell in hand or some way to get it back or whatever. But no, Eternal Witness does a lot of cool things. I remember one of the first few like loops we started exploring was specifically to perform a loop to generate infinite mana, usually with like Dark Ritual and Lotus Petal, just because those were cards that were pretty easy to find at the time and just good cards in general. So like we like having these cards.
Yeah.
And then once you generate infinite mana, in Kenrith specifically, you can just make everybody draw your deck. But at the time, we were both doing a lot of Lightning Bolt loop. I'm still looping Lightning Bolt personally, but
yeah, Lightning Bolt's a good enough card to play in CDH.
Yeah, and it's a win-con.
Yeah, and if you're playing Displacer Kitten and Eternal Witness, it turns into a win condition, which is pretty. It's once again just like your shells and your cards that are already good. Displacer Kitten can turn them into win conditions pretty easily with a little bit of thought, which is one of the nice things about the card. Yeah, so along the lines of Eternal Witness, people recognize that the same way that Muldrotha gets flickered, Lurrus can be flickered, and like you mentioned, with the LED and the Lotus Petal make infinite mana. Now you have to beat an Esper Shell to do that particular loop, because Lurrus is white-black and Kitten is blue. Little weirdness there is that there are very few Esper commanders who serve as outlets. I think the only two that jump to my mind were two of the only three that see play are Tivit and Marnius Calgar. And of those, Tivit doesn't
easily
act
the better
as...
one.
Huh? Well, he's better, but he doesn't
Yeah.
act as a sink for infinite mana the same way that Marnius does, because your sink is sinking it into clues. But the awkward thing there is, in order to generate clues, you also have to flicker Tivit, which means you have to take an iteration of casting of flickering Lurrus off to flicker Tivit, and even then you're only getting to draw 2 cards probably, because your opponents will give you treasures at that point. But Marnius Calgar allows you to sink it into his ability to generate tokens, and when tokens enter the battlefield, you can draw a card. So there is that loop. I think I've really only seen the Lurrus line played in 5-color, so like Kenrith, something like that, because it makes the most sense there.
For sure.
Yeah. But yeah, so Eternal Witness, like you said, you could loop spells, converting things like lightning bolts into win conditions with Lotus Petal. You can also do some really strange plays with really any ETB creature, but also like rituals. That's another one. I think you've toyed with that in Calamax too, where you're like flickering like Eternal Witness or like an Archaeomancer effect or something to grab like a desperate ritual, and then you cast that, which reflicker, and then you can grab another like a Rite of Flame or something like that out of your graveyard, and then you can make infinite red mana, something along those lines.
Yeah.
And find a way to sink it.
Yeah, so around the time that you were talking Eternal Witness, I had suggested Lurrus because it kind of fit the need that you were doing, and at that point, I was kind of very much signing on board to do Kitten stuff. But you at the time were definitely exploring more of like the highest potential end, so 5-color, everything at your disposal. Like this is the maximum that this card can do. Meanwhile, I'm kind of on the other. I'm trying to work my way the other way. I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's the absolute minimum requirements that we need in order for Kitten to still be good, while also having like a very cohesive shell kind of around it. So I think I was at the time I was playing like Calamax version like 1 or something like that, and I just kind of jammed a Kitten line in there. Displacer Kitten, I think it was on 2 different rituals. It was on Rite of Flame, Desperate Ritual, and essentially the deck was looking to make use of Chord as its win condition instead of its Intuition, which is I think what the database version was doing at the time. And I figured we could do something differently and something better, so I wanted to explore that, and it worked out pretty well for the most part. It did a lot of the similar things. The only thing that it was missing that Entomb effect, and I figured out pretty early on that Entomb is such a critical card for doing Kitten loops. It does a lot of different stuff to you, because when I look at the 5-color version and the 3 and 4-color versions that I've really messed around with, Entomb specifically is the deal breaker. Everything else you can pretty easily replicate or figure out like pretty creative workarounds, but Entomb was huge, and that's it. That's where I figured out kind of a lot of the harder rules for Kitten is like Spellseeker and Kitten wins you the game from nearly most positions. Very few positions are you able to not get out of, or at least generate a huge amount of value that you can't just force your way through whatever you need to force your way through. But just figuring out all those extra pieces was definitely crucial for the lower colors.
Yeah, I think the way that I phrase it in my primer on my Kenrith list is Displacer Kitten lines realistically are bounded only by the amount of mana that you have access to, and the spell, the number of spells that you can cast.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically, even if you're disrupted, you can come back so long as you have enough mana to continue going just over the top, because most of the lines, unless they have to be done at sorcery speed like Luris, can be accomplished at instant speed. At least the way that I construct my Displacer Kitten lines. There are a number that have to be accomplished at sorcery speed because you're not casting instants, but that has been my my preference when working with the card, is to favor things that where the spells cast are all instants, just because you can go off from anywhere. So we mentioned rituals like Paretic Ritual, Dark Ritual, things like this. They generate more mana than their actual casting cost. So as long as you can cast another spell, either for free, like a Noxious Survival or something like that, or if you can cast something else that also generates mana in the same colors, or if you could do Dark Ritual and Paretic Ritual, as long as you have one black to get it started after you cast a Paretic Ritual or something like that. They can generate infinite mana with themselves, so the combos themselves are pretty self-contained, and can go off at instant speed, which not only lends itself to resiliency when people are trying to disrupt you, but it also makes interaction points really tricky if people aren't familiar with the lines, and it can also mean it opens up the potential to just play, draw, go, and then win the game at instant speed when over the top of someone else trying to win, which is really strong in and of itself, being that you can effectively cast silence by just letting your opponents use all their interaction to stop someone else from thoracling or something like that, and at that point you can then go try and win the game over the top of the Thoracle trigger.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could even chip in with your counter magic, and then once everyone else is burned out, after the Thoracle player's stopped, then you go for your line on someone else's turn. So that's the tricksy thing to do, but it's pretty neat.
Yeah, I can say as someone who's versed a lot of your kitten decks and just other kitten decks in general, even if you know the interaction points and you know the choke points, you're still just limited by the amount of mana that they have available, and if they don't have another instant to cast, because if they have an instant to cast and they have mana available, it doesn't. You need more interaction. It demands more and more and more from you, until you are going to run out of resources, because at some point, like if it's removal, the kitten's already bounced itself. The removal is not going to matter. Docksides, Eternal Witnesses, Spell Seekers, like these things, like they've already been flickered. They're probably going to get reprocs, and that's already going to be huge.
Yep.
But yeah, no, thankfully Spell Seeker is also blue, because specifically the shell of Displacer Kitten, Spell Seeker, and then good spells just lends itself to a lot of it's a package that you can put into a lot of different decks. You just have to get a little bit creative with how you need to use them.
Yeah, whatever your payoff is. But yeah, if you're talking about like jamming Displacer Kitten into low colored shells, let's go with the lowest color, mono blue. The Cash Cards Unlimited event in 2022, I think that was right after Displacer Kitten had been released, and that card, Displacer saw play in the tournament-winning deck, which was Teferi Temporal Archmage, because the genius who crafted that, I'm blanking on their tag right now, but they recognized, hey, well, if we're flickering 3 fairy and artifacts and all this stuff, why not put this card into my mono blue deck and use it to flicker my Planeswalker, who is my commander. That'll allow me to use his downtick, which is ritualistic in its own effect, to untap permanents and generate more mana, cast some more spells that might even flicker my commander again. And then, of course, this genius figured out that Sensei's Divining Top, which draws a card and puts itself on top of the library, goes infinite with the commander Displacer Kitten, because the commander allows you to draw 2 cards. Draw a card, look at 2, so you always put top back into your hand, but then you cast the top, which then reprocs your commander, and so you can go and just draw your deck, basically. And it's really crazy. It's also insane because that deck plays very few creatures at any rate. You're playing like maybe 10 or so, and so all of your rocks and everything is going to flicker your commander, allowing you to draw more cards and storm through. And so as someone who also plays who also plays Teferi list, I saw this tech and I was like, oh, well, let's slot Displacer in there because that seems insane. We're already on top. Just another combo in mono blue is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah.
And plus it just like generates crazy value with your commander.
Yeah, I think the fact that you can play this card as high as 5 colors and as low as 1 color, the lowest color it can, it really speaks to the kind of the power level of the kitten specifically. I like the card. I think it is able to provide a lot of different avenues to victory that I think are very criminally underlooked in CDH.
Oh, for sure. And we were talking about interaction points just a moment ago. Even as somebody who plays Displacer Kitten in honestly most of my lists, I just really, really like that card. It's one of my top 3
Is there
favorites.
a blue deck that you don't play this in? Like you personally, I'm trying to think.
Me personally, I can't think of one.
Is it in Heliod?
Oh yes. I've been experimenting with the new white-blue Heliod, and it is in there because I'm playing 3 fairies, so it combos. It can flicker your rocks, so it's ritualistic.
Were you playing it? What's the Jeskai guy that we tested out for like 2 days? No, that guy wasn't. That guy wasn't. Displacer Kitten wasn't in there. That was way too tight of it. That was way too tight of a deck that we could fit it in, even if we wanted to.
Yeah, but yeah, I play this card in basically everything at this point.
I can't think of a deck like immediately that you personally are not playing Displacer Kitten lines in.
Yeah, I really like it, and so I'm going to play it in my lists. But yeah, at this point, I basically treat it like a Rhystic Study or a Mystic or more. Like, I'm playing blue, card goes in. I will cut it later if I need to.
Unless we're on Rule of Laws, in which case, probably don't need it.
Yeah, probably don't need it at that point.
We probably shove it in there. Why not?
Yeah, just flicker my soul.
It protects the rule of laws.
It protects the rule of laws. You flicker your enchantments. Yeah. So, but even for me, I can mess up interactions with Displacer Kitten just because it can be so finicky. Like especially if you're playing like competitively, if you let something resolve, you can't run it back and be like, oh, I wanted to react before this trigger resolves. Like, okay, sure, I'm gonna pack of negation your thing. Okay, that resolves. I'm going to go counter your spell. And they're like, okay, cool. I'm going to cast this cantrip and I'll put this pact back into my hand. I'm going to counter your spell and I'll put this other counter spell back in my hand. And that's like, what? You're like, okay, well, I guess now I have to interact on the stack, but now you have another counter spell in your hand, and it's just like, whoo, baby.
It's very overwhelming, very, very fast. I mean,
makes huge stacks with a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, just last week, Dinosaur, I was testing out one of the new battles we talked about, the 5 mana one that was like, oh wait, this makes Kitten go burr. I won a game off of literally having it out and then just casting a Displacer Kitten and having just 2 pieces of interaction plus
Second
a ritual
Spellseeker effect seems strong.
It's both Spellseeker and it's Eternal Witness in one card that also triggers Displacer Kitten upon cast.
Yeah, that is a card I'm probably going to be testing in Teferi, actually, is the battle for, what is it? It's,
Oh, I just looked it up the other day because I was looking at foil prices.
Ooh, someone liked it.
I mean, I just want it before it goes up in price.
Yeah, I got,
our Invasion of Arcavios.
That's what it is, Invasion of Arcavios. Yeah, I got a foil full art, the other day when it was like $1 and I was like, this card seems really strong.
Yeah, no, the foils on it are still criminally underrated. I'm still seeing them for like 50 cents, so I need to pick up a copy sooner rather than later. But yeah, I really like the card in Kitten Shells as kind of like the bleeding edge. However, I would say 5 mana is just a hair bit too expensive right now. At least for our meta. I like it. I think I'll probably put it back into lists once we slow down a bit more. As of right now, tapping out for Dinosaur and then tapping out for this card is really, really tough. Although I did like that I could cast it and then find a Pyroclasm effect with Calmax out and then just wipe the board. That felt very, very good just to be able to go Dinosaur for blocker against the Yuriko player, play the battle, get a board wipe, cast the board wipe, and then cast Kitten for the win. I'm like, this was very good sequencing here. I liked a lot of what it did,
that's nasty.
5 mana for something that we can't cheat out, a little too expensive for me right now. But it will come back nasty. Eventually. It was a disgusting card. Yeah, Eternal Witness and Spellseeker are really the glue that holds Displacer Kitten decks together for me, just because they facilitate literally anything possible.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Sky is the absolute limit so long as you have Displacer Kitten, Eternal Witness, and Spellseeker in your list, and like things to do with it.
Yeah, that Invasion of Arcavios. Yeah, at 5 mana it seems a little hefty, but it's probably in lower color decks, like 3 colors and lower. It is probably playable, at least in slower metas. Like you said.
1 and 2 color decks, I think specifically that are on Displacer Kitten shenanigans are trying to shove that into the deck. Arcavios is going to bridge everything, especially in like blue-red. Where like you can kind of get away with doing the Spellseeker like Ewit lines, but not quite, just because you don't have an Eternal Witness effect, and this is your Eternal Witness effect.
Yeah, you can only do instant sorceries
because yeah.
What's it? Archaeomancer?
Yeah, it's only instants or sorceries, which for 1 more mana than Archaeomancer, you're also finding the other half of your combo that you're needing.
Yeah, and it's 1 more generic mana.
It's 1 more generic mana. So you can do things like Desperate Ritual, Flicker, find your other ritual, generate Infinite Red, and then Lightning Bolt for safety, or you can just go Desperate Ritual, Lightning Bolt, and just go even the entire time, and then just be able to, if someone interacts, you just pivot into something else.
Oh yeah. Speaking of blue-red Displacer Kitten stuff, I think one of the coolest Displacer combos that I've seen in a little while is It, and it's for the commander Nero Wild Mage. You know that one?
So is it the 6 mana one?
Yeah, it's another Battle for Baldur's Gate card. Nero Wild Mage is a 6 mana human elf shaman. She's a 2/7. She casts for 4 and a blue and a red. Says whenever you cast a spell, you may put it on the bottom of its owner's library. If you do, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card. You may then cast that card without paying its mana cost, and then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This ability triggers only once each turn. But with Displacer Kitten, like we were talking about earlier, you can make a new instance of Nira every time you cast a spell. So by stacking your triggers properly,
you can just go forever.
Nira. Yeah, you can flicker Nira, making a new instance of Nira, then go cast polymorph the spell out of your library, and cast that. And if it's not a spell you liked, it triggers Nira and Displacer Kitten, so you can stack your triggers and go find any spell that you want. Which is pretty neat. It's pretty cool.
That's crazy. I like that though. That's fun.
Yeah, it's neat. How practical is it? I'm not really sure, but it is super cool.
It definitely is very cool. Again, this card creates a lot of interesting scenarios and gives a lot of decks just alternate ways to win that aren't just like the usual standards. I mean, depending on the deck, you still play the usual standards, but it allows for more flexibility. Remember, like early on in kind of our Kitten discovery period, I labeled one of the superpowers of your Kenrith deck was like you just play out the cards that you want to play out because you need to play them or because you want to play them. Like Eternal Witness, pick up a land. No one's going to stop you.
A lot.
No one's going to stop you doing that. And then some time passes and you go Displacer Kitten with an Eternal Witness already on the battlefield. Oh.
Who's gonna nuke an Ewit? You're gonna waste your Swords to Plowshares on that early game?
Or spend Spellseeker because you need to get interaction specifically for something else, or you need to get Neoform to dork into a Gilded Drake or something like that.
Yep.
These things that are already spent and the Kitten just breathes insane amounts of life into it.
I do love that.
It's an insane thing. It's a very insane thing that the cards are able to do.
I think it's really cool to be able to not have the deck building restrictions that or not deck building, but the play pattern restrictions of I can't cast my Spellseeker until I am ready to win the game because this is my tutor for consult for my Thoracle or whatever, where you could just reflicker it. I also like the fact that it is not, while it does see a lot of play in decks and play patterns with it can become standardized if you're playing super specific combos. If you make a dedicated Displacer list, especially in multiple colors, the combos you can play become a little bit more varied, and it's just interesting to see people winning with things that aren't Breach, that aren't Thoracle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm much happier getting blown out by the Calax player looping us to death with a Lightning Bolt and the Lotus Petal than I am seeing somebody cast Intuition for Savine's Rack Breach, and Lion's Eye Diamond for the umpteenth time.
Yeah, the non-linear lines that Kitten brings in, like even if you like, say for whatever reason you're in a blue-black X deck and you just weren't on Reanimate, but because of Kitten specifically, you put Reanimate in the deck, chances are there are more lines you can do with the cards that were already in there.
Oh, yeah.
Just you need the specific context in order to find those lines. It's some of my best, most memorable games have been like me finding lines I didn't even know existed in the deck.
Yeah.
Purely because I'm like, well, I need to do this. Oh, this, like, these things grab this thing, which grabs this thing. Oh, we're cooking. We're cooking.
Yeah, board context is really important with the card.
Incredibly. And especially just because this deck, or Kitten and Spellseeker, just do a lot of tutor chaining. There are unfortunately instances where you're like, I really need to, Spellseeker to search out my Reanimate, but I had to use it earlier to bring back the Kitten, or something like that.
But even with that, there's a lot of extending you can do where you're like, okay,
absolutely.
well, Reanimate's in the bin, but now I can go get this Noxious Revival. Now I can cast Noxious Revival, targeting my Reanimate. I'll go get a Brainstorm with the trigger from reprocking the Spellseeker. Now I'll put the Reanimate on top of my library. Now I'll cast the Brainstorm. I'll proc the Kitten. I'll flicker my rock.
In my hand.
I'll flicker a rock, and then I'll go resolve the Brainstorm to draw this Reanimate. There's a lot of interesting things you can do where you can just like extend from various positions because you're only limited by the amount of spells you can cast, therefore the mana.
Yeah, so long as you can keep casting spells, you can generally find your way out of most scenarios. I'd say most Kitten lines, whenever I'm going through them, I really only get stopped by like me overlooking something or like me just running out of mana for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Which brings us to Dockside.
Yes.
We abuse Dockside a lot.
I mean, everyone does at this point, right? There's nothing super cool about that card. But yeah, Displacer Kitten and Dockside goes crazy. Even if you're not going infinite, just the ability to be like, yeah, well, I guess I didn't need to use this path at the end of your turn, but there's something I kind of don't like. So
I'll just make an extra 6 mana.
Yeah, I'll path your, like, I don't know, Llanowar Elf. Your commander doesn't... It doesn't matter because I'm flickering my Dockside, like you said, making 6 going into my turn, and now I'm going to win the game. Not even with Displacer Kitten combos, but just generated so much value.
Yeah. That's the one thing I like about this deck. Just any deck that can just abuse Dockside ETBs more. Like, I like having cards that are able to reproc or redo Dockside more than I like decks that are able to turbo find it for like the one time, because like it's just more fun to flicker Dockside and just get more Dockside ETBs rather than the one crucial one you needed,
Yeah, and I think depending on the meta, that can just be way better anyhow, because sometimes there is a Stony Silence effect in play, or your count is just not high enough to do anything meaningful. So, like, turboing out your Dockside on turn 3 was only going to make 3 treasures. Sometimes it's just not enough, like, for what you're trying to do. There aren't a lot of loops that go infinite at 3 Dockside treasures without some sort of like ability activating reducer, like Training Grounds or something to that effect. So I think that the ability to just be like, okay, well, I'll cast a counter spell by tapping my lands and make 2 treasures, and then I'll go to the next person's turn and I'll remove something as they try and win the game, and I'll make 2 more treasures, and then I'll go to my turn and I'll untap with all my lands and the mana I was planning on having, plus an additional 4 mana from these treasures that I just like effectively like stumbled into. And now that gives me enough to cast 3 spells on my turn that are really strong, but also while I'm casting those spells, I'm reducing all of their costs by 2 because I'm flickering Dockside along the way. Mm-hmm. Super, super good.
And specifically Kenrith is like, oh, cool, now I can cast Kenrith for free and continue to hold up my mana that I was trying to do. Or like, if you're on like a Thrasios shell, like, cool, this is an extra Thrasios activation I have banked now.
Yeah. Oh, certainly. Just being able to incidentally cast spells that you weren't planning on casting to advance your own board state can be really strong. And sure, it's not like it. Once again, we go back to the whole thing of like not Dockside, but Displacer Kitten is not really doesn't fit well into turbo or fast combo shells typically. If that's your primary game plan, just because it frequently needs to make it around the table once, or you need a certain amount of mana to abuse it effectively,
or just be really ahead on board that it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. But like, once again, if you have the flex slot and you're playing blue black X, like if you're on all the cards that make Displacer Kitten good, especially if your commander has like an ability that only triggers once per turn or has a really strong ETB, like why not try and find a way to force it in there? It seems like it could be really beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. I struggle to think of decks that are playing like both ad nause and this, for instance, unless you're like a chunkier mid nause build. But even then, I feel like I'd rather just run more tutors in that instance then, if that's the case, or like
Run more tutors
than like Displacer Kitten, for example. Unless your commander specifically goes bonkers with Kitten, like I think I've seen cast builds that are playing Kitten. That seems really, really good. Just to manually
it's cool.
Storm.
That's really neat. Yeah.
It manually storms off. Like that's pretty cool. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Kitten. Anytime I play blue, I'm usually playing some sort of Kitten shell, just because I think you said it best when you're like, oh, I'm going to cast Intuition, I'm going to get Savine's Wreck, I'm going to get LED, I'm going to get Breach, and she's like,
is it great? Yes, it is. It is such a strong combo. Can't knock anyone for playing it. It's super good. I play it in a lot of Just Guided shells myself.
It's a good combo package.
It's a good combo package.
It's just really fucking boring.
Yeah, that is true. And that is one of the other things I like about Kitten is that because you're only limited by mana and like creativity to some degree, as long as you're willing to like plan out a bunch of different lines ahead of time, so you have at least generally scripted like paths to follow, and then you can deviate based on context after that. Like it's really it can be very challenging to play, which I enjoy. And I think it's just very intellectually stimulating as a card.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing with me. Like just tanking for a minute, trying to chart out my lines, just like mid-turn, just being like, well, I wasn't trying to go off now, but I guess I can now that like my stars are starting to align. So, what pieces am I missing? What do I need to play around? How do I get to this? Can I recur that? Do I have enough mana for this, that, or the other? Like these are all things that like are really nice to like think around. And with the type of counter magic that we play, it's really easy to also just midway through the combo, if someone catches us off guard, to immediately pivot and grab like Pact of Negation or something, or like Slaughter
cast
Pact,
a removal spell, flicker your
removal spell,
Arcavios, grab a counter spell.
Yeah, like it's really easy to pivot around when we're actually trying to go through the lines. You need to remember, like, oh yeah, if I have Spell Seeker and Kitten, like I can just use one of my Kitten flickers to get a Pact of Negation and then just go right back to where I was trying to go anyway, but I've also dealt with whatever is on the stack trying to stop me.
Yeah, it's really neat, and it's really flexible. That's for sure.
Incredibly flexible. If you like Pod, if you like Toolbox, if you like weird non-linear lines, like Kitten's great. Kitten's great at doing all of those things.
Yeah, I did like what you said about, I didn't think I had the win here, but like I guess it presents like you're like, oh, I wasn't planning to win, but I guess my opponents have just all tapped themselves out, and I happen to have this Displacer Kitten in play and this Chord of Calling in my hand. Well, I'll tap my Mana Vault for 3 green pips, cast a Chord, flicker my Mana Vault, put an Eternal Witness into play, win the game. Like,
sometimes that just like happens, that you just like stumble into your wins, which like you can do with like Thoracle Consult stuff, but like I feel like Thoracle Consult's it's either incredibly telegraphed or like hits you out of nowhere. I guess this also has like the hits you out of nowhere aspect, but it's not.
Or it's very telegraphed. I don't know. I would say it's probably falls into pretty much the same. Like, I'm playing a Displacer Kitten, and I was like, oh shit, that's not good.
do we have the counter spell on stack? Because otherwise, we are not going to be able to deal with this card.
Yeah, just the fact that it's going to be eating at least 2 remoal spels to kill it most of the time.
At the very least, like I think we have enough like experience with Kitten to know that like unless we have literal stone cold nothing and we just need a blocker for something, like we're casting Kitten with something to trigger.
Yeah.
At the very
Even
least,
if it's just a soul ring.
Even if or like something to protect itself, like something like non-important, just to like protect the kitten or whatever.
Yeah, just another instant.
Oh,
I've counterspell, misstep your own vampiric tutor.
Mm-hmm. I've countered many of my own spells to trigger the kitten one more time.
Yeah, just combo extend. You're like, well, I have 3 counter spells in hand. I have a spell seeker. I need a removal spell and a tutor for something that spell seeker doesn't grab, and the combo piece. Well, I guess I'll cast this spell. Trigger, grab my thing, counter my own spell. Trigger, grab my other thing. Counter my own spell. Yeah.
Or like offering your own thing, just get more mana, just cast more stuff from your hand. Or
I have
or
lines
like
dedicated to winning the game that way. In my deck. Make infinite mana with offer.
I can probably suss out that line pretty easily. But one of my favorite little things is you just reset Remora with this card as well.
So good.
It's very, very good.
I'm gonna kill your Rhystic Study. In response, I'd like to cast a Brainstorm and protect my Rhystic Study.
Yeah, I'm gonna this Mr. Kumar, I'm gonna be here for a lot longer than you thought now.
Yeah. Yeah, because now you're paying 1 or 2 mana and then drawing 3 cards and then flickering it to reset it, so you're still only paying 1 or 2 mana.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's super good. Like, very flexible. It protects stuff. It just can't say that enough. Flexibility just defines this card.
It presents so many opportunities to just either like find your silver bullet pieces that you need, or win the game. Oftentimes, you're doing both at the same time.
Which once again brings it back to what we said at the very beginning of the episode, where you're
attacking.
Yeah, you're attacking on the stack as well as with your permanents that are already on board very frequently. And unless you're playing Stifle or Trickbind or something like that, which very, very few lists do, you're not interacting on the board, which leaves you only to interact on the stack, and sometimes that's just not enough. Frequently, that's just not enough.
This is why I'm advocating for Pyroclasms in your deck now. Just kill the kitten, because it doesn't matter how many times it flickers. In response to the Pyroclasm, you need to have counter magic, otherwise your kitten dies.
So
that's when you
giant growth it. That's when you giant growth it.
That's when you just like slaughter pact whatever else, flicker the spell seeker, get reanimate, and just go, okay. What next? What next? What next? Matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay, there's so many games where I just hear you, you just go, Displacer kitten on the stack, and I just go, all right, we're packing it up. We don't have enough. Like we have 1 piece of interaction here. Counterspell? No. Okay, cool. We're dead. We're done. Like, how many times have you gone like Displacer kitten and like literally show me anything? Just show me any.
Oh, I've heard you say that a lot. I love newbies where it's like Displacer kitten. They're like, okay, or you're like Neoform my 3 cost into a 4 cost, and they're like, sure, that's fine. You put kitten into play, and they're like, okay, and you like start doing stuff, and they're like, I'm gonna counterspell that. And you're like, Nox survival doesn't matter, and they're like, okay, I'm gonna cast a removal spell. You're like, Slaughter Pact doesn't matter. I'm gonna cast another removal spell. You're like, okay, I'm gonna cast like Pact of Negation, targeting my own spell at this point. It's flicker my thing, doesn't matter. And they're like, well, I'm tapped out, or I have no spells, or yeah.
It's like, cool, I still have another activation in this deck. I'm gonna get my reanimate.
Yeah, or like sometimes you just let things resolve, and people are like, wait, I didn't think that was gonna work, and you're like, that's okay, it doesn't matter. Do this like you said, reanimate, or like cast a new card and start proccing that. And you're like, oh, should have saved that interaction piece. Didn't see it going down this way.
Yeah, that happened. Unfortunately, the game that I won with Arcavios, the Yuriko player I was fighting went Fierce Guardianship on something else, and I'm just like, okay, sure. Fierce Guardianship resolves. Kitten trigger targeted the Arcavios, and they went, right. I'm like, yeah, like the thing I casted didn't. It was we were in a counter spell war. Like, I have Fierce Guardianship for your counter spell. I'm like, okay, that resolves. And
I'll get it back. I'll counterspell again.
No, it was more so I had it was ritual kitten trigger target the battle. I had 3 pieces. I had 3 instant speed things, so they needed a lot of interaction to stop me.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, just so you know, in the future, The ritual was the thing to hit there technically, because it would have had to
taking you off mana for your other spells to
taking me off
Kitten.
mana for my other things. Like, it would have forced me to have something else to reproc it and kind of re-get into the situation.
Yeah.
But like that's the correct target. Like, you don't, the counter spells, I'm just going to gain value off of. Like, hit the thing that you're like initially started the chain.
And that goes back to the whole, like, people just don't necessarily assess the value that Kitten's accruing, like, correctly, because they don't know the cards in your hand. Like, sometimes it is correct to counter the tutor, but sometimes it's like, oh, well, I need to counter the soul ring that you're casting, because that's going to give you the mana to cast the next spell to proc it. But then if you do that, then you'll also have mana to cast the spell to protect and to proc over the top and stuff like that. And I think that, talking with you right now, I just realized the best way to verbalize really one of the best strengths of Kitten is you look at your hand, you look at the amount of mana you have, you look at the number of like potential flicker targets you have on board, and you know exactly how many pieces and what types of interaction your opponents need to stop you, and
how little
they don't
actually have to stop you.
Yeah, they don't know. You know, it could be 3 spells, it could be 1, it could be 7. Like, you know exactly what it's going to take to stop you, and your opponents have no clue, like, contextually what it's going to take. Like, whereas with Thoracle, it's like, sure, I have 3 counter spells, they're going to need 4 counter spells, and you know that and they don't, but also you get stopped by, like, a silence or something like that. And because Kitten can go off at instant speed, and Thoracle trigger is stuck wherever it is on the stack, unless you have a Displacer Kitten in play, get new trigger. Like, it's relatively easy to like trick you with like a silence or something midpoint, and then like counter here, or maybe someone has a channel, or like they can interact with you after the fact using an endurance or something like that. So it's harder to get caught off guard, I think, than it is with Kitten, because while there are many points of interaction, frequently the ways to stop the loops are so specific that your opponents don't know which type of interaction they need to pressure. Maybe they need to be pressuring a removal spell, maybe they need to be pressuring countering something on the stack, but they just don't have any clue unless they know exactly what's in your hand.
Yeah, and that's so huge. Like, unfortunately, the easiest way to stop most Kitten lines is literally just hard stacks effects. So things like Rest in Peace shut off the graveyard loops, and Opposition Agent shuts down all the tutor chains. Both of those on the battlefield at the same time, you're not getting anywhere, really. You can generate a decent amount of value, maybe.
3 fairy.
3 fairy.
Cast your 3 fairy, you're going to bounce that rule of law, then you're going to cast a spell to reproc, and then you're not going to use the graveyard, so...
That's true. And so, like, there's a lot of wiggle room. Again, like, for me, whenever I see you going off or other Kitten players going off, I'm always, at the very least, tracking their mana. I want to know what cards they've used, and I want to know how many cards they have in hand, because at the very least, if you have 3 cards in hand, all 3 of them are instants, and you potentially have mana to cast them all, that kind of clues me into, okay, where do I need to try and interact? And even then, it might just not matter where I try to interact. Like, that's the whole thing, is like, you don't know when to interact. Like, oftentimes the point of interaction is not even when Displacer Kitten's on the stack, maybe.
Yeah,
I'd say on the stack is easily the safest place to interact with Kitten, because you can just counterspell it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's...
Sometimes it needs to be like a swords on the spell seeker, or an endurance to shuffle away like a lotus petal that's in the graveyard or something,
or a well-timed opposition agent or something.
Yeah, some of the cheekiest wins I've gotten away with are like turn 1, like land, lotus petal, Sylvan Library. Game goes for like 6 or 7 turns. Displacer Kitten, Eternal Witness, recur like a Dark Ritual or whatever. And then like cast the Dark Ritual gets countered, I cast a counter spell, they cast a counter spell, I cast a counter spell, and then the like Mind Break Trap the Dark Ritual, and it's like, okay, I'll resolve the Displacer Kitten trigger targeting the Eternal Witness that you responded to earlier, because people don't always wait for you to flicker your card, because they think it's more beneficial to like not let you put the trigger on the stack, because then you could recur a card and then flicker it again and recur another card, and you'll get those cards back to your hand with an E-wit or whatever, even if the E-wit gets exiled or something. So they don't want to give you the option to proc multiple recursion triggers or multiple tutor triggers, so they respond to the Displacer Kitten trigger. You're like, okay, cool. Well, I'll resolve the flicker on the Eternal Witness, and now that you've used your Mind Break Trap, tapped yourselves all out, I'm going to recur this Lotus Petal and just do the thing all by itself. And like, people just forget that cards go into graveyards.
Yeah. Eternal Witness and Kitten just, like, they just work so well together.
So good. So good.
It's ridiculous. They enable so many crazy different lines and just pathways and avenues and recovery. It's disgusting.
Yep.
It's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah.
One of the things I think I kind of mentioned early on is the necessity of green, not only for like Eternal Witness, but like Neoform in this deck is so huge.
It's amazing.
Because it's specifically fetchable off of Spellseeker. Between that and Finale, you have pretty decent coverage for what Spellseeker grabs if you're like trying to just go on the combo line and not trying to play like the longer, more high level. Like, okay, I need a Spellseeker now to get interaction, then later I'll worry about finding like the Displacer Kit and half the thing. But just like, no, I need to go now. Between those two cards and just like Dork Density and like other creatures, your commanders often might like factor into like your pod levels and stuff like that. We run Birthing Pod in this deck because Kitten flickers the Birthing Pod. So all of these like scenarios we propose of like, oh, you need like Kitten and Eternal Witness and Spellseeker, like one, like you're already casting these spells and you're already trying to find these spells usually during some point in the game anyway, but also around a lot of the creature tutors and a lot of the creature tutors that put them into play, so it's not hard to find these cards or put them into spaces that we want them in.
Yeah, well, the crazy thing about Spellseeker too, aside from grabbing Neoform, is that Neoform goes 1 up and Spellseeker's already a 3 cost, so you're literally paying blue, green, and 3 mana, blue, green, and yeah,
two blue, green.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, for some reason I was thinking Neoform had an extra generic tactile.
Nope.
But yeah, it's 5 mana to go tutor Displacer Kitten and put it into play. And if they don't counter the Neoform, which maybe people don't always see it coming, especially if they're newer or don't know what your deck does, then
counter the Neoform going to 4 always. That's the point that you fight every time.
Yeah, because then they lose their Spellseeker and they lose their Kitten to play. But yeah, it's Spellseeker's just a hell of a card.
I think if Spellseeker wasn't a card, I don't think Displacer Kitten is like a deck that we can talk about in CDH, just because it facilitates everything. It finds every single piece that you need at any single point in the chain. It finds your interaction, finds your protection, finds your outlets.
Displacer would probably see play still in like 1 or 2 color decks, like mono blue or like blue red or something like that, because it does generate a lot of value.
I think on your like heavy rock decks you still play the card just because you get to flicker your like Thran Dynamo or whatever
if you're still playing that card. But yeah, it would definitely be a very different conversation, even with Luris and Eternal Witness. Like, we would probably see much less conversation about Displacer Kitten. It would probably still be like very important in some decks, but it would not be the slotted into anything type deck it is, because if you put it into a Spellseeker in a deck, you can probably assemble a combo.
You can figure
in those
something
color
out.
Combinations.
Yeah, you can figure something out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think I have displaced all over the place. I had nothing for this. I am flickered out of existence and I'm entering back in, I think.
Okay. All right, Kitten. Well, we can wrap this episode then.
That's so uncomfortable to hear. All right. Atlas, always a pleasure talking with you, especially over a card that we've put a lot of brew power and theory crafting into. Kitten's a very interesting card. Play around with it. It's a cool deck and a very cool package. Any last remarks about the cat?
Card is really good. Hell of a card.
Hell of a card. All right. Well, that should just about do us for this week of Mana on the Rocks. I want to thank our listeners, as always, for sticking around with us. Y'all are great. I hope wherever this podcast finds you in the world, you're doing all right. We'll catch you next time.